Thank you, Michael. So, as a representative of Sony and a person that's been living this stuff, I want to make believe that I'm actually there with you all. So, via remote webinar, appreciate you all sitting in. I'm going to walk through XDCAM and some of the benefits of working in the XDCAM professional disc space. So, basically, as a person that's worked all over the country with numerous production companies, my job is to basically get them up to speed on what's out there. But I also try to educate to say, okay, well, here's what your current workflow is. Be aware of this, and that might actually help. So if they're existing customers, those are the kind of people I work with, or just relationship building to get new customers to look at our stuff. As a sales support engineer, I do travel the country, sometimes internationally, and you see my contacts there, so feel free to contact me anytime in the future. The XDCAM formats themselves consist of two different brands, if you will. There's the XDCAM optical disc, which is logoed with the XDCAM professional disc system, or XDCAM HD. And then there's the S/S recording cameras using the XDCAM EX. Now, the EX is a MP4 file format, or extension, if you will, of an MPEG-2 encoded file, and that's actually using a FAT32 file system, whereas the optical disc is actually using a UDF, the universal disk format, and it's an MXF wrapped file format. For the purposes of this, we're going to basically just focus on the optical disc, but the meat of the XDCAM series in the format is the broadcast format. It's basically a newer version like an HD cam. It's three chips, CCD, full raster, DeX, and a drive as a lower cost way to get files off the disk media and into your edit system. But the key is whereas previously existing formats in the HD space, whether it be, say, an HD cam or DVC Pro, HD and the like, they were doing some sub-filtering of the frame size, they were doing some sub-chroma sampling on the color space, and they were limited in their audio support. So one of the great things of the XDCAM 422 series at 50 megabit is we got it to maintain the 1920 by 1080 raster, or 1280 by 720 if you're shooting 720p, and it does support both of those, 1080 or 720p. But you also maintain 422 color sampling, so it could lend itself, even though it's just 50 megabit, it could lend itself into VFX or a green screen component. But a big key is that you also, and this was something that was mentioned during the opening, was during the news section, is that a company is coming out with support in Avid for, hey, you can use our proxy video. Well, heck, our stuff's been around since day one, where at the point of acquisition on the high res, you also get the proxy video recorded at all times. And that proxy video and audio is a lightweight, frame-accurate representation to the high res. So that lends itself to great NLE functions and great workflow benefits. But another thing about the format is that there's 8 channels of audio support, so you can get 5.1 mix, you can get a 7.1 mix, and also maybe do a 5.1 in a secondary language, or multiple pairs of stereo. You have a lot of flexibility in that file format as a mastering format. But essentially it equates to the best blend of quality in a format and low data rate. But the biggest thing is since it's based on MPEG-2 long op, everybody can edit it natively. For the purpose of this presentation, though, we're going to kind of focus on some of the lesser-known stuff, and these are the newer products in the disk format. So the U2 drive, which is this here on the left, the HR1 MK1, which is a portable deck that can be used in a number of capacities, and for great as a rental device because you can utilize it all day, even though it's just one rental line item. And then you also have the XDCAM station, which is like a 5-in-1 appliance with internal drive, the ability to use S/S cards or optical disc, and also Ethernet to move stuff around to post facilities or post bays. Some of you may be aware of the XDCAM format, and what really to me is the meat of this is, as I mentioned earlier on during the lead-in, was that the key value for working with a digital file format is that you really need to understand that when you're recording as a file format, you need to look at the actual edit system first before you look at the camera, because if you can't bring it in natively, you're going to spend a lot of time doing you're treating it like tape and capturing and encoding, and when you do that, your edit file format winds up being one generation less, and it probably took real time to do that, and you're likely inflating your file size. So if I did a quick little kind of a build here that shows you, if you do a street price look, conservatively you can get a 23 gigabyte optical disc for about 20 bucks, and that's going to give you at the 50 megabit quality, which by the way is the standard that's out there. Certain shows like Survivor, Amazing Race, and scripted like Parks and Rec and Curb Your Enthusiasm, well, moderately scripted in Curb's case, Real Housewives shows, Celebrity Apprentice, X Factor, Undercover Boss. A number of shows are actually leveraging this quality. All all the Kardashian stuff. So the key is that you have really low cost of the media, and it's something that gives you a really good quality. But that cost right there is very low cost, and that's going to give you roughly 45 minutes on media that's inexpensive enough that you can afford to keep on the shelf. Now, if you look at some of the other card solutions out there, for instance, like the Panasonic solution, which is a great solution, and it's been wildly supported over the years, but now you're looking at something that same type of card, roughly giving you 32 minutes. If you're shooting at a 1080 format, you're looking at around 32 minutes. It's about a gig a minute, and that card's going to run you around $460. So you're looking at more than $14 a gigabyte versus less than $1 a gigabyte in our case. So whether it be P2 or S/S with the XDCAM EX, it's not really something that you can afford to keep on the shelf. It becomes a temporary storage solution. And then that winds up saying that you're going to have to spend money down the line to not only have data managers to push these files around, but you're going to have to double up on your equipment. And this build basically shows you. The key value of XDCAM is that you can, A, have it as a nonlinear format, but if you choose to bring it into your edit system, you can bring it in natively at 50 megabit, or if your edit system doesn't support it, then you transcode it and you bring it in, say, at 145 megabit, whether it be a ProRes format or DNX and Avid or whatever. And primarily we're going to be talking over the course of this presentation in Avid because that's kind of the standard for the long-form multi-format shows out here in LA. But keep in mind that the format works literally with every major NLE out there. So the idea, though, is that you only have one instance of it online, but when you work with any type of a card format, and let's say for this example you were using P2 at whether it be DVC Pro HD or AVC HD 100, now you basically have to make a secondary copy as a protect, and that protect copy may be that, here's your protect, and then you make a working copy, which could be either 100 megabit or you have a 145 for editorial. So the bottom line, though, is that now becomes, these guys here are your masters. This winds up getting wiped away clean, and you have to have some sort of a protect here. In the XDCAM format, you basically have one instance online that you've copied over fast at the real time, and it's lossless, or you've converted over, but your backup sits on the shelf. And the XDCAM optical disc media is the only acquisition format available for you that's affordable enough to do that, to be able to shoot it, and you literally have your camera masters on the shelf. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of the realized efficiencies in my mind. Now, you have all probably seen this, the discussions about the promise of being able to use from acquisition to archive, edit, play out, distribution, whatever. You can use the same media all the way across, and that's true. And really what allows that to happen is it's the MPEG-2 long-op format, that 50 megabit that we utilize in our system. Now, you can also record at 35 megabit as well. It's just that you don't have quite as robust a signal where you have the 8 channels of audio and the 422 color sample. But let's look at this, because there's actually other cameras that we've added to the system, or the family, I should say, that like the PMW 100 and the 200 and the 500 and the 160 and the 400 will be coming out. Those are cameras that are dual file system where they record to the S/S media, but they can record in the UDF file format as well as the FAT32 format. But for this webinar, we'll be focusing on the optical disc related products. So if we look at a product lineup between the two, single layer and dual layer, these are the products right here, the cameras, the full-size decks, the HR1 and the U1, which is a single laser USB 2.0 connect, where it's just a gateway to put your discs in there. These all utilize the single and dual layer media. Now the single layer media, as we mentioned, is around 20 bucks. The dual layer media, which is 50 gigabyte and gives you about 100 minutes of recording at 50 megabit, that's going to run you under 50 bucks. So again, still under $1 a gigabyte. Now, these other additions, the U2 and the XDCAM station, which we'll talk about, those utilize all 4 different media types, the single, double, the quad, which are all out now. And the quad is a write once, 128 gig, primarily for archive. And we'll be coming out with a 100 gigabyte triple layer disk shortly thereafter, and that's actually coming soon. But these devices will utilize all these. And the nice thing is that with these devices, you don't have, well, with the U2 and the U1, you don't have to have a deck. So it's a nice gateway to get your content in. So let's move to the next slide here. So this is where I think the confusion comes up, and this is where I think as a company from time to time we can lose people. This is a standard marketing slide for our media, and this is stuff that kind of always gets me scratching my head, because this basically puts the onus on me to demystify this for customers. So professional disc media with optimum flexibility. Well, okay, well that's great. So what does that mean? I'm going to basically break this down point by point. We have file-based disc recording, instant random access, and IT connectivity. Okay, these are general things. High-density recording, all right, transfer rate, durability. So let's break this down. Well, the main bullet basically says, all right, it's low-cost media marrying old school to new school. What that means is that you can treat it like tape. And now you have nonlinear benefits, the ability to see it in the thumbnail, review this in the field, not have to spool through stuff. But if you're ready to flip the switch, you can treat it as a file-based recording and actually import as lossless files into your edit system. That's great. This PFD23AA, that's our model nomenclature, right? So that basically means that you have disk capacities at 23 and 50 gigabyte capacity. That's for your camera application. Again, as we mentioned, there's a quad layer and a triple layer coming out soon. So we have file-based disk recording. Well, let me break that down. Right? So file-based disk recording, what that means is that the files are digitized at the point of recording. So you actually have an NLE available file on the disk media, which you can afford to keep on the shelf, that's sitting there as your backup on this disk media. There's no capturing required. Now, if you want to use it as tape, which a lot of shows did early on, was let's just treat it like a lower cost media that I can keep on the shelf, and I'm just going to recapture into Avid or whatever to create an offline and then do an online later. You can do that. But if you want to do it as a file base, you don't have to, and you can just bring it in faster than real time and lossless. So that point of that is that when you do bring it in losslessly, your camera master that's sitting on the shelf is exactly the same quality as your edit master, which is not the case if you're using a tape format and you capture in real time. So your edit master is actually one generation lower in terms of quality than your camera master was. The other key is that you get not only the great HD quality, which again, the standard for the Survivor shows and all these great-looking shows like Parks and Rec, and you know, a bit of a guilty pleasure of mine is The Millionaire Matchmaker, which is a great-looking show. It's just a lot of fun, but that's also shot in the 50 megabits. So not only that, but you have a low-res proxy that's frame accurate. It's a 2 megabit file size that has video and audio, so it's great to be able to use it as reference. And you can also, in these cameras, record to a USB thumb drive, and say a producer or somebody else can walk away with all the content that was shot on that disc, although you don't actually have the original disc. And you can do EDLs with that, a lot of flexibility. Instant random access and IT connectivity. All right, these things crack me up. But the way to explain that is that the disk access is nonlinear. So you have immediate access to any clip via the thumbnails. By thumbnails, I mean anytime you do a start-stop, record start-stop, you're literally capturing a clip, a dedicated clip, and you have a first frame of video thumbnail that appears in the disk. You also have the ability, nonlinear, to go in and expand that clip. So let's say that you had one clip on the disk that's 30 minutes long because you shot an interview or you did some sort of a press conference. You can go in and expand on that clip, and it'll break it up instantaneously into 12 different segments, and you can continue to drill into that and get a reference point and then create a shot marker that saves to the disk. You also don't have any recueing that's recorded or necessary before recording. You don't have to cue it up like tapes you're stepping on stuff. This basically, you can be playing video out on a deck or camera and then immediately go into recording. It'll jump to the end of your content and append at that point. That's huge. So it basically keeps you from yourself or saves you from yourself. You can also basically create EDLs and ALE-based captures, or I should say, when you do those, your queue-up times are faster because it's just a non-linear control. It just, boom, it's ready to go because you have 9-pin control, but there's no pre-roll or anything like that. So at the very least, you save time in your real-time captures by using the non-linear capabilities. You also have the ability to do in-camera and deck playlist creation, which you can save to the disk, and now if you just want to basically save it that way and queue it up, you put the disc in, and maybe an executive producer wants to screen a clip that you've built. All right, we can create the playlist based on the raw content in the field, hand it to a person that you don't want them to see it, they queue it up and play it, and then just that playlist will play out, and therefore they can't see the original raw content on the disc. That's something that's available if you want as well. Plus the fact that if you want, linear capability is always available because you have 9-pin control in the decks, and the disk media is accessible that way as well. Looking forward, high density recording. That's another one that cracks me up. I don't even know what that means, but look at it in terms of storage capacity. Because the data rate is so low, the flexibility of the media, you have great runtime because you can record HD, you can record SD, you have proximate video, and then the metadata is really a key. This is all the nonlinear benefits and tagging that you can do either on the fly or after the fact. And the user data is something that we'll get into in great detail going forward, but that's something that you want to pay attention to. The user data folder on the disk is key to this solution. So higher transfer rates and long recording times, again, efficient codecs give you that capability, quick file transfers, and again, that native support with all the major NLEs. Because you have that now, if you're doing it at a 50 megabit, you don't have to do it necessarily offline or online if you're in a smaller environment. Yeah, maybe if you're doing 13 to 20 cameras, you're going to need to do an offline for saving space. And I'll show you examples where you may need to, you could avoid that as well with some third-party tools. But if you're doing a smaller operation where you have enough storage to deal with the stuff native, for instance, like a show like Community, which is actually acquired from the using an ARRI camera, but they actually ISO the SDI output to an XDCAM deck. That way, their camera recording that they use in post natively is the 50 megabit, and that's what they cut on natively, and then they wind up delivering to the network. But it's all acquired directly to the optical disc. You can keep that stuff in-house. You don't have to go into an online process. It can be just, hey, your offline is the online. And then the savings of costs allow you to say, all right, well, maybe we can do dailies in-house, and with the color space, you've got some VFX drop-ins or promos that you can do. So a lot of flexibility there. High durability and rewrite cycles. This is the other thing about the media, is something with a 50-year shelf life, but at the same time, you can either afford to use it once and keep it on the shelf, or you can reuse it 10,000 times or read it 1,000,000 times. And these are basically the standard capabilities of the disc media itself. So, a lot of shows, when we had a little bit of an issue with the tsunami 2 years ago, and media wasn't readily available for a little while, well, people realizing that, well, maybe I don't have to have this every single camera master, maybe I can repurpose some of this media. And so people were basically melting down their stuff and repurposing the media, and they realized that, wow, this stuff is great. So now people have moved over to a model where they'll buy a bulk of stock for one season, and then they'll buy a small bulk after that they keep their melts on, and then they repurpose the original bulk of season 1 for season 2. So it's a way to really minimize your overall cost, which is huge. And plus, on top of that, it's a larger format in terms of space, so you actually have area to write your details on. You've got a spine on a jacket where you can create a house ID, and again, it's very much along the line of a tape mentality, but with all the benefits of nonlinear. But again, lending itself in a phased approach for linear editing capabilities, where you don't have to basically do a forklift upgrade and go all file-based right out of the gate. You can treat it like tape, under 9-pin control, but the real savings are if you're going to use it as a file base and do file-based transfers via the lower cost drives, or maybe have a sprinkling of decks. The biggest thing, though, is that your metadata options are huge. We'll get into that later, but in depth. But you can do clip naming in the camera and deck, and that way you're avoiding all the logging and all that, because at the point of acquisition, if you set it up with a standard operating procedure, all that clip naming can be done at the point of acquisition, and that's a huge, huge time saver. Plus, you can also back up any generic content. This is something that a lot of people don't know. With the data storage options, you can back up generic data to the same disk media that holds your broadcast video. So in an archive environment, it's basically removing the need for LTO, and you can take all of your evergreen content from other shot equipment and move that over to this. Or maybe just backing up anything relevant to your program itself and just keeping that on the shelf as an archive. So now let's look at the directory structure. If you take a disk and you put it into, say, a U1 drive or U2 drive, or into any of the decks, and it's in the FAM access mode, because the decks are not only recording devices, but they also have IT connectivity where you can connect to a computer. You look at the disk, you would see this file structure. Clip is where your high-res video is housed. And then we also break out the XML file, which is your metadata file, make that available for the nonlinear editors, which is really handy. And then sub is where your low-res proxy is physically housed, and both of those, notice, are MXF wrapped. And so that's stuff that's, again, generally available and usable to all the major NLEs. The edit folder is where if you did any of those internal camera deck playlists, they would be saved there, and those are things that will stay with the disk everywhere the disk goes, and you can call those up from a list and play it out. So it's really handy for like sports applications that are driving billboards or scoreboards, or what am I looking for? I should say jumbotrons, which we don't make anymore, but they're commonly referred to as that. Even, for instance, like a show like America's Funniest Home Videos, they create their pods that they basically roll to the screen in studio, and the stuff that also goes to air, they roll that all off of a disc, and then they queue it up and they play it out, and treating it almost like a video server. The general folder is basically a hard partition for ½ a gigabyte of general storage space, and that's pretty much neutered by the application of the user data. The user data is critical, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. The user data, again, is where you can just drag and drop whatever content you want into that folder, and now it's something that is viewable and usable as an archivable format. Now, the difference, though, is that if you have XDCAM content that's been recorded, the clip folder is something you can slam that disk into a deck and play it out, take it right off the shelf and play it out. Whereas anything in the user data folder is something that would need to be restored. So truly think of the user data folder as a data archive partition, if you will, on the disk. But the key is it could be the entire disk capacity. You don't even have to have any broadcast video on the disk, and the entire capacity could be that user data. So let's look at some of the lesser known benefits. The PDW U2, again, is the secondary add-on drive. It's about 50% faster than the U1 was. It supports all 4 of the different discs, and ultimately when the 100 comes out. The key is it's under $5,000 in the US to get one of these. And versus having, expensive decks at every edit station or every logging station, it's a great alternative for those editing and logging applications. Plus, it's a gateway where you can, I'll show you later on, where you can actually marry the low-res video with the high-res audio and post, and therefore bring files in fast in real time, and that becomes your offline. And there's a third-party tool that can do this very well with Avid systems, and we'll talk about that shortly. The key, though, is that it's a USB 3.0 interface, and so you basically can connect to anybody. And with the dual lasers, again, it's much faster than the U1, so your transfer speeds are greater as well as your write speeds. And again, there's the easy access to the wonderful, wonderful user data folder. And again, that's the ability where in a 50-year shelf life, you can back up all content as well as your video safely, securely, and again with that 50-year shelf life. So the user data folder is something that people that don't know about it, well, heck, I've got all this, maybe I'm using a different format. Maybe you're not shooting XDCAM altogether. Well, if you just have a U2 drive or a U1 drive, maybe you're shooting everything on a third-party camera and using maybe a Key Pro as your external recorder, or Convergent Designs Nano Flash, or maybe you're using GoPros or Sony's Action Camera or an NX camera, something that you can't physically record over to as video to the XDCAM format. Well, then you use the user data folder on the optical disc. And this is something where you literally just copy those files over with a computer interface. It's brilliant. And so now the extensibility of the media is not just a broadcast format, it's a broadcast and data media format. Another lesser known benefit is something called Content Browser. And Content Browser is a software browser that kind of merges, if any of you guys are familiar with PDZ1 or XDCAM Transfer, which was your way to get the MXF files rewrapped, not transcode, but rewrapped into Final Cut. And then Clip Browser, which was XDCAM EX Viewer or XDCAM Viewer. It's all of those in one device. And what's great is this is actually something that normally is about $20, but right now we've opened up a 2-month window where you can download this for free. Since we can actually deal with it in Windows and Mac, and the cool thing is that not only does it support XDCAM EX, but also AVC HD codec. So if you've recorded anything on an NX cam like an FS100 or the fantastic FS700 or any of those cameras they're in, you can actually see the trees appear in the content browser. I'll show you that. But the other thing is that XAVC, the codec that's supported in the F5 and the F55 cameras, or the F55 camera specifically, you actually can get in there and view that content with this. And for right now, it's free, so something to get your hands on. And that's downloadable again at the Sony Creative Software /content browser site. Here's a view of what that content browser looks like, and this is huge because if you look at the user data folder here, and then you see underneath, maybe you've copied stuff over. It actually recognizes, you can actually customize, or I will have my Avid project files. It creates a folder structure. If you just take an SDHC from an NXCAM camera, you just copy the files over, and those of you that worked with those files, you see how deeply rooted those MTS files actually are. They're like 4 or 5 folders deep. We don't have to go rooting through them and open them up individually. You can move them here, and using Content Browser with the user data folder on the disk, it actually gives you the thumbnail view, and it actually pulls them forward, and you can see them. Same thing if you have any S/S card archives from like any XDCAM EX. Same capability. So it's basically bringing it into a simple thumbnail view. And again, you can customize it and categorize it and make it really easy to sort through all your content. Again, that's downloadable at sonycreativesoftware.com/content browser. And again, it's free for right now, so definitely take advantage of that and jump on it. Now, another lesser-known benefit. This is my favorite device out here in the XDCAM lineup. It's the PDW HR1 MK1. It's something that is a portable deck that truly is 5 devices in one. And the key is that it actually costs less than any of the half-rack decks like the HD1500 or the F1600. The main function for me is that if you have a multi-format show, let's say you're shooting optical disc, you're shooting S/S, and maybe you're shooting another format that kicks out SDI, you can literally take all of those and ultimately record it to this deck, whether it be as an ISO record, just a manual trigger, or if it's some of our other cameras, you can physically set it up to record via HD SDI, and that's this feature right down here, where you can actually say, all right, I want to put it, let's say I'm shooting with an F3 camera, which is a super 35mm shallow depth of field camera, but records to the S/S. You can actually set up that camera into a HD SDI remote mode, put the deck in that same mode, connect them SDI, and therefore when you trigger the F3, it also triggers the deck to go into record, and therefore at the point of acquisition, you walk away with an optical disc camera, or a copy on the optical disc at 50 megabit, as well as the 35 megabit in the MPEG MP4 file format in the F3. That's huge. That's very, very helpful. But if you think about it from a rental standpoint, okay, It's got a built-in display. It can run an AC/DC battery. It's got all these capabilities where, yeah, it rents as one line item on the ledger, but yet you're utilizing it for 20 hours in the day because it can be used in Video Village, it can be taken out into post, it can be used as a conversion station to take your S/S cards, pop them in the side here, and then convert those files over either as a backup to the user data folder or as a dub, convert it from the MP4 file format over to the MXF file format. And you can also do a conversion. So say you could do 24p on the card, move it over to 1080i, so that can give you that kind of 24p look, kind of like what the HDX 900 used to be famous for in the Panasonic world. And that's a cool feature that you can do that here. But the key is it's also giving you 9-pin control. It also has an HDMI out, so while you're doing those dubs, you can actually QC that along the way, but you don't have to have an expensive display like an HDSDI monitor to view this. If the display that's built in, that 9-inch, is not big enough for you, then kick it out HDMI in any consumer display, and you got it. Plus, there's an option if you're using this for DVB-ASI, if you need it for microwave output, a $4,000 option basically replaces a $20,000 encoder in a production truck. So it's wildly flexible, and again, less expensive than the regular deck. Built-in display, AC/DC battery, great deck. So let me give you a production example. This is a show that I worked on that was a summer show from, I think, last year, maybe the year before. But they had a bit of a conundrum because it was such a highly produced show. They had all these different formats, and the problem was, well, how are we going to basically get this in an effective manner, cost-effectively into post? So working with the production company closely, and with a lot of meetings and sitting down and getting buy-in. And this is a production company that was already very comfortable with the XDCAM format, but this was a new tool. So we brought it to them and said, look, you guys are having segment producers shooting to HDV. You guys are having field runners running with contestants shooting to an EX3 camera and shooting to the S/S card, and yet you also have over a dozen or so, 15, 16 zone operators shooting the full-size XDCAM cameras. You're going to wind up having all these different formats. It's going to take you forever to bring that into post. So what the solution was to have this HR1 in the field, and it basically allowed them to real-time play out the segment producer content over to disk, and then converted from the S/S card automatically over to the optical disc, and therefore what wound up going to post was the same format. That made that a whole lot easier because everything at the point of a post got to them at the 50 megabit format. It's as if it was all shot on the XDCAM disc. Now, they wound up having to convert that over. They had to work with about 80 or 120 hours of POV footage, and then they shot the opening sequences on a large format camera, which was not a really easy native edit for them. So that wound up still being painful, but it was nowhere near as painful for them as it would have been had they not utilized this device. And it wound up being used all the time. The great thing was it was used with the battery running out, and so there was one place where they would have post guys doing these conversions. They'd stay back in the hotels and do this, but they didn't know what the quality of power service would be. And one place in the Toda Gorge in Morocco where this was shot, there was a hard power cutout at 10 o'clock, and thankfully we had a backup where we had the batteries on there just in case power died, and the dubs were allowed to continue. So that was huge for these people, and that allowed much easier process in post. Okay, another solution out there is the XDCAM Station. There's 3 different models, but 2 of the models support a professional disc and the S/S cards. Now, the great thing about these is that not only do you have S/S cards where you can copy files over that to the internal drive, whether it be a hard drive or a solid-state drive, but you also have support for all 4 discs. And this is a great device because not only can you transfer things at the same time, you can record in, you can play out, you have an internal drive that can be accessed by post by up to, depending on the device you're using, 3 to 5 different users. So it's truly also another device that's multis in one. And this is actually being leveraged by Big Brother. They have actually more than a handful of these shows like Jim Rome. A lot of sports applications using this as quasi-servers. And so, well, here you go. So in production and news applications, you can use as internal drives where it shows up as an optical disc. So the internal drive is basically like a large, either 1 terabyte in the hard drive or a half a terabyte in the solid state drive unit, one large disk. So you can actually use it as an ISO record or an aux record or live and then play out to displays. You also have the ability to converge that where, all right, we're taking in disk content, we're taking in S/S content to the internal disk and then making it available to the network for post. And then talk shows and sports are using it where they can push the files around Ethernet. It's great. It's got Ethernet. It's got disks in, disk out, all your standard interfaces. But you also, again, can use it as a quasi-video server. So it's something that, again, not many people know about it, but it's a terrific device. All right, another lesser-known benefit of XDCAM is really, this is on the Sony family that people don't know about, is Sony Vegas. For those people that are looking to use something that's inexpensive, but highly effective. The SonyCreativeSoftware.com/Vegas software. This is something that for those that know about it, because it's Windows only, but for those that know about it, they swear by it because the bang for the buck is unreal. The key to me is that it's nearly every codec that's out there is supported natively, and it's the first edit system to support XAVC truly from the 5 and 55 cameras that we've come out with the 4K side. But the great thing is it's a multi-format timeline support and great audio tools. You can edit closed captioning on the timeline, and it's DVD and Blu-ray authoring as well. So those of you that aren't aware of Sony Vegas, you can get in cheap for like $200. You can drop, $600, $700, $800 depending on what you're looking to do. But it's a little bit of everything to everybody as long as you're in a Windows environment. But it's great. Another thing is just as a support mechanism, this is something that I'm really proud that our company still finds the need for this because it's important sometimes when times are tough. You got to get your elbows up and box out to make sure that you're doing it right. And this is an area that I'm really proud that we do right. This is our POSSE group. It's a Product Operations Support Center. And those of you that have maybe have questions, I am in downloading software, I'm working with a new tool, anything in our professional standpoint, we have a call center with warm bodies available to answer your call anytime from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., which means that if you're on the West Coast, by about the time you're ready to start doing some stuff, they'll just be closing. But keep in mind, you can always call people like myself. But they're great for doing operational support for hardware, software, etc. All right, so let me give you guys some examples of how groups are leveraging the optical disc and the XDCAM format. This is an example of a large production company. I'll just say it. This is basically Mark Burnett Productions. Pretty much they've mandated that all of their shows archive on XDCAM. Specific to Survivor, this is kind of what they do. Same thing with Celebrity Apprentice. The larger shows follow this stuff to a T, but it's basically the content's acquired on the XDCAM disc, either on the F800 or the 700 cameras. And if they have any other file formats like S/S, as we mentioned, we'll convert that over from S/S to the optical disc via the HR1 MK1 deck. The cool thing is that the camera masters are labeled the same as tape masters. They have the cool versions, and as I mentioned, you have the clip naming and all that stuff. But what's great is that where they used to physically, let's say if they're in Island and they're doing standard F before they moved over to XDCAM Optical for HD, they would have to make Betacam dubs of the Digibeta content, and then that would be shipped over. Or even when they first did HD, they would have to be making dubs of that stuff. Well, what we came out with were products like the HC1500 deck and the F1600 deck, which actually have gigabit Ethernet connecting them. So they'll have, at the Celebrity Apprentice, at the Survivor locations, they'll have fly packs with dedicated decks tied to each other with nothing other than an Ethernet cable. They'll put a disk in and basically do a disk clone, and it's a 2 times faster than real-time copy. Not a dub, but a clone copy, where they'll take that clone, which is bit for bit accurate for the original acquisition, and they'll send that back to LA for their post. And therefore, during the rest of the production, the rest of it stays in New York or wherever they're located at, and then at the end of the production wraps, then they'll send everything back. But it allows them to do their quote-unquote offline with the exact same disk media that they had. It's a huge benefit. Now, it's a little bit of expenditure because you have extra decks and you have extra media that you're doing, but the security they provide is huge. And I remember having conversations with Mark himself where he had talked about, being in these foreign countries and never knowing whether you can get that content out or not. And this is a way that they can do that very easily. And whether they're putting the stuff in backpacks or duffel bags and getting the content out, this is a way to do it, and the quality is the same as what they originally acquired, which is huge. And so then when they get that back into post, they're ingesting the files natively, which is great because they get the real-time ingest, or the fast and real-time ingest, but the key is it's lossless, and they edit that way, which is huge. Ultimately, when they're done, they'll lay that off the HDCAM SR format or whatever the deliverable is to the network. But what they keep inside and keep in-house is actually the disk. They will take that XDCAM sequence, or they'll take that Avid sequence, and they'll export it to the optical disk, and now they have it as video on there. But keep in mind, let's say they're doing Survivor. That's a 44-minute runtime show roughly, right? Well, they have basically the entire second half of that disk of a 50 gig disk is empty. So what will they do? They'll take the graphics file, scripts, notes, any of the soft deliverables that went along with that, as well as they'll back up their Avid database. They'll take their project files that were into the making of that episode, and they'll save that back to the same disk, and therefore all on one disk, taking up half the real estate of half-inch tape. It's all on one professional disk with the video and the data backup. So if they ever have an issue with a catastrophic hard drive failure, in a way they can go back to this and still have their program masters. They can have a lot of the soft copy stuff at their fingertips. Very, very cool. Now let's look at a small production company, and this is a company that does a lot of deliverables for DIY and HDTV. And they were when we first met with them, it was just a guy. We were giving out some XDCAM discs at a reality show production company, a reality show producers conference, and he sat in on one of my presentations. He goes, this sounds interesting. And they were using very expensive cards, the S by S or the P2 type cards, and well, they were using a P company. But the bottom line is they were using a lot of data. It was taking a lot of time to manage those files, and they actually, at the shows, whether it be the house crasher types, they'll have associate producers that would basically take the media from the camera operator, because they don't have ACs, they don't have data wranglers, they are the data wranglers. So they'll take that content, they have that lug around laptops that they put the files in there, and they'd have to convert those files over and back it up, and it was really a headache for them, because they weren't the most technical people in the group, but at the same time it was something that was a lot of stress for them, because ultimately if the content was missing, it was their fault. So they would take that, and overall the capacity over time was overwhelming, and it took a long time to deal with that, because you're pushing over higher data rates that take up more capacity, and you're slowing things down. And plus the file management was a nightmare, and the fact is that they were dealing with everything backed up on hard drives. So once we worked with them and they test our stuff out, it's a dream for them. Like, wow, we get to shoot in the film and treat it like tape, where the APs just take the disc out of the camera and put it into a jacket after writing what the house idea is, and that's done. Their work's done. Ultimately, when it gets into post, they would just basically do a native ingest, but they would take the proxy video and they would create basically their roundup of their select, and they would basically just bundle that up into QuickTime 7 and just send it off as a rounded file off for transcription. They could do that in literally a matter of minutes. That was huge for them. And instead of delivering in HDCAM and Digibeta and the tape stock it took for those separate deliverables, they could effectively, put them both onto one 50 gigabyte disk, the high def, the standard def, because you can mix that media. Plus, they were also taking their other media and soft deliverables and put it on that disk. But the bottom line is that ultimately, when they have those disks on the shelf, taking up a lot less space. And the other thing is that with the faster ingest, the less data, less management, they're able to basically turn stuff around faster, which means they can take on more shows, which means they had more revenue, and they're just growing like weeds, and they couldn't be happier. So that was just something they weren't even aware of it. They took it on it, they jumped into it, and they're loving the format. Okay, let's switch gears. Let me give you a different use case. This is an example of what Dr. Oz does, the show that's shot at 30 Rock in New York City. It was really unique when it first came out, because it was a dual kind of job with Harpo in Chicago. Now, Harpo was actually using Avids, which were exclusively standard definition, and 30 Rock is for the show, they basically had 6 different hard cameras, Sony studio cameras, which were tethered, if you will, into XDCAM decks in the control room. And that's where the recordings would happen. What they would do is they would take those 6 sources plus the other, and they would basically take the discs over into another room, and they would use free software, freely downloaded software called something called ImageBurn, and they would generate what's called an ISO file. It's basically a disk file. So they would mirror the XDCAM file disk structure, and they would remove the clip contents, which is where the high-res is housed. So what they would send is basically all the metadata and the proxy video, and that would be FTP'd over to Harpo. And it would, typically for 45 minutes in a single disk, you'd look around, you're getting about 600 megabyte per disk at the maximum. So that's what they were FTPing over to Harpo. Harpo gets that. So they receive these ISO files from 30 Rock, and that contains the entire disk structure, but a blank clip folder, as I mentioned, where the high-res is housed. And then they use another free software application called Virtual Clone. And what they would use with their standard def only Avids is they would take that ISO file and they would mount it as a local XDCAM disk and directly import it. So it's like it's sitting there, but yet instead of dealing with the 23 gig that they had to push around, now they're only dealing with, say, 600 meg, but they have frame accurate, low-res proxy video and audio. So they basically took that into their standard def only Avids, and they used that proxy video and metadata, and they cut all their promos, and what they would do is they'd take the EDLs and the AAF files and email that back to 30 Rock. 30 Rock would then take those files, and they say, okay, well, it's pointing to this parent HD file, and so I need to pull this disk off the shelf, and they do a batch import of only the content that was touched in the sequences. So they were able to kick around their promos and cut the stuff in very short order, and the coolest thing is Harpo never touched the HD data. 30 Rock never had to send the HD content anywhere. This is basically just using the workflow, using free software tools, and sending stuff from New York to Chicago via either FTP or email. It's brilliant. So this allowed them, before they went and aired the first show, they had promos for probably a good 2 or 3 weeks worth of shows, where it would have taken a lot longer otherwise. So they're very happy with this. So let me give you another example. This is a scripted show, Parks and Recreation. wish I had a poll for how many people watch this show because it's brilliantly done. But what's really cool is it took them a while, but they really bought into the whole nonlinear mentality. So when they first started, they were doing it just like tape. All right, well, okay, The Office is shot on the F900. Well, we'll do that. Well, the F800 is a nonlinear version of that with some greater benefits and higher quality. So we'll use the F800 and shoot it. But they used it like a tape and just captured into their Avid systems. And it was real-time ingest, manual logging, and then they would do the regular online as the second pass. Normally do. But the cool thing is yeah, you get the faster cues than tape, but that's pretty much all they were realizing aside from the low cost of the media and the fact that you have an archive sitting on the shelf for camera masters. I mean, that's cool. But we went back and visited them a couple times, and once they were comfortable enough with the workflow and we explained it to them, they started ingesting natively and avoiding the capture into DNX. And now they're only dealing with the 50 megabit. And that in itself saved them a couple hours per day of ingest time. Now keep in mind, this is only a 2-camera shoot, and they don't shoot 40 hours in a 24-hour day. So, because that would be impossible. But they were saving a couple hours a day of ingest time. They were happy with that. And then we went back later in the season and said, if you guys actually, the cameras can label the clips for you at the point of acquisition. That way, when the files come in, if you set up a convention, camera A or season, say, PNR season 4, episode 1, it'd be Ep1A for camera A, and then you'd have a sequential numeric value that increments every time you hit start stop. You literally can name the cameras or name the clips for you in the acquisition process. They said, well, let's try that. So they started doing that, and it was saving them another hour at least per day of not having to name those clips and all that extra time it was taking an associate editor or whatever, assistant editor. So at the end of the day, they've now basically lopped off over a dozen hours a week just by leveraging the tools that natively exist within the XDCAM format and the ability of the optical disc media. That's huge. Okay, so let's look at some other lesser-known benefits. There are third-party edit tools. We talk about the high-res and the low-res proxy and how that works. There's one tool that's out there that works really well with the Avid system, and there are a number of high-profile production companies that utilize this today. But it's really something that rather than doing the true offline online process where it's real time both times and really user intensive, this allows you using the lower cost disk drives, the U1 and U2, or if you have the decks around, you can do that as well. But it leverages the I'm sorry, I should say this is NL Tech. It's a company with the link there. They have a product called SAT Auto Ingester, SAT-AI, and what it does is it leverages the proxy video and marries it to the uncompressed audio on the disk and makes it available in either Interplay or in their shared storage. So that dramatically reduces their ingest times because they're literally doing it just as one process. So they get the sweetened audio, the higher quality audio that they want to deal with, and they get that reference video, and it's beautiful. And so this is just perfect for a lot of the multicam long-form shows, and a lot of them that edit in Avid systems, which most of them do out here, they really, really want to take a look at this if they're not already using it. So that's NL Tech's AI or SAT Auto Ingest. Great tool. That's pretty much it on the XDCAM side itself. The real key is you have so many different tools and there's so much that can be done with it. It's a matter of actually just biting it off. The reality is that with one disc media, you can have a broadcast format and the equivalent of like LTO in a single disc media that you may already be using today. So it's just leveraging that. Now, 4K, this is something that Michael was asking about. This is definitely coming. It's been around since 2005 in the theatrical space and with the 4K projectors. Sony, we actually make those as well. On the acquisition and certainly the consumer display side, this is something that's coming around. Now, 4K gives you a lot of flexibility, but the bottom line is when you're dealing with data and what to do with that data, it's still going to be an issue. And in 4K, well, let's get into what 4K is. If for those of you that are not familiar with 4K, let's do a quick little refresher. You look at stacked up pixels in terms of spatial resolution, which is your horizontal pixels across and vertical lines to get your your spatial frame. SD video is 720 by 480 or 486, however you want to look at it. Full HD is 1920 by 1080, and that's around 2 million pixels. Then you get 2K. A lot of people were trying to push 2K as HD or HD as 2K, and it's not. 2K is a cinema format, and it's a different resolution, 2048. In a 1080 space, it's 2048. Then you have what's called QFHD. This is something that in the CES range, where you have okay, this is the Ultra HD. So this is something that needs to be understood. There could be some confusion out there between QFHD, which is your quad frame, 4 different full HD frames stacked up, 1, 2, 3, 4. But that's not actually true 4K, because the 4K as it is 7% larger, and that's the 4K we're referring to as the 4096 by 2160. And that's the DCI version of the 4K format. And that's a 1.9 aspect ratio. Now, the 3840 by 2160 is something that a lot of consumer groups and ourselves, we've done this as well in our consumer products. We'll say, hey, it's 4K. Well, actually, it's 3.8K. It's QFHD because it's taking 4 HD streams into it, and perhaps not necessarily the true 4K of 4096. So to make a distinction, the consumer 4K is usually going to be QFHD, and the cinema 4K is the 4096. That's an easy way to look at it. Well, the bottom line is that if you're doing it 12-bit, 14-bit, 16-bit, it's going to generate a ton of data. And what do you do with that data? So in the camera lineup, the F5 and F55 are things that we just filled in between the FS700, the F3, which are both super 35mm, and then the F65, which is actually an 8K camera that's oversampling for 4K. The F5 and F55 are 4K cameras that record 4K. They can record, the F55 can do QFHD, and the 5 and the 55 can do multiple versions of HD as well as 2K. And just to give you a quick snapshot as to how powerful the two cameras, the 5 and 55, are. These are an example of the different codecs that are supported, and these are not even including the RAW formats that the two cameras can record in. This is just the internal recording. So you have the 50 megabit HD XDCAM, which is the baseline of this. So that's the very least you can record. So you're actually recording a 4K oversample to get 50 megabit, which is going to generate just a beautiful, beautiful image with 14 stops of dynamic range. And by the way, the F5 is an ISO 2000 base, where the 55 is a 1250 base. And the difference between those, the F55 basically has a frame image scan, which is like a global shutter. So you avoid any CMOS issues with yellow cam and flash banding. But so look at all these. There's 24 different systems here just in internal recording alone, let alone the external recording RAW formats. Bottom line is you're looking at a ton of data. So what do you do with that? These are the different formats that can be recorded to: AXSM, S/S, SR memory. Well, that's where we would come into, and I want to introduce the optical disc archive, or what we call ODA. The great thing about this is it's leveraging the professional disc media, that XDCAM Blu-ray stamped media that's higher tolerances than the consumer version. But there's 12 of these in a cartridge. And depending on whether you're using the 23 gigabyte or the 50 gigabyte or the 100 gigabyte or the 128 gigabyte, that'll determine what your capacity of that disc is, or that cartridge. And this would be an alternative to LTO. Now, question might be, well, I already got LTO. Why would I want to consider something like this? Well, question is, how many of you might know some of the issues with the other formats? If you have a cartridge and something that has a 50-year shelf life and long-term data storage, and by that, what I mean is, and here's an example of what the capacities might be: 300, 600, 1.2, and 1.5. Now, the cost of this media is not going to be as low cost as LTO, but the big key here is long-term. Just like with the mentality I try to preach of, if you're shooting as a digital file format, make sure you're looking editorial, because if you shoot on a highly marketed camera that you may not be able to natively edit, well, you're going to have to transcode those files. And let's say if you're shooting on a GoPro, and maybe you shot GoPro and it was like a 12 or 15 or 20 megabit file, up until recently you had to basically transcode that just to edit it. So that 15, 20 megabit file is now 115, 145 megabit, just so you can edit that. Well, okay, you may have spent a little bit of money and saved some money up front, but you wind up spending a ton of money and a ton of time to push that stuff out the back end. Well, it's the same thing here. On the optical disc side, if you look at hard drives, which you're having to basically do data migrations every 3 to 4 years as that stuff starts to either fail or the capacity is not enough, or LTO, where you go from different generations to generation. The biggest issue with LTO, even though it's widely adopted, and it's ironic that you would go from tape as an acquisition format to maybe a digital media, and then you wind up archiving back to tape. That's a little ironic to me, but the biggest issue, though, with LTO is that there's no backward compatibility typically past the 2 generations. So you go from generation 1 to generation 3, which is, of course, over 6 to 7 years. You're basically staring a huge check in the face, where you're going to have to not only take the time to migrate all that stuff over, but you're going to have to buy new hardware, you're going to have to buy new media, because even the media is not backward supported. And that's the big issue for me, and the big selling point for me with the optical disc archive. And that's something that allows you to virtually get copy migration free in something that utilizes media that you're already comfortable with. And there's also media management software there where you can actually see it in a thumbnail. Now, kind of just gloss over that, but I want to see if you guys want to see more on the optical disc archive. There's a Vimeo clip. He basically does an interview with the Sony UK rep where they walk through the system. This is something that just kind of came out late last year. They had it at IBC, and for those of you that are interested, it'll be at NAB. But it's definitely something to look at because the performance is faster in terms of getting to smaller clips. Since it's a nonlinear media, you don't have to spool through all the tape. You're not going to have the issues with wear and tear. You also have that at least 50-year shelf life. The only issue becomes the cost of the media. But what's more expensive, to spend a little bit more media up front, or to basically have to redo it over every 6 to 7 years? All right, so in closing, pretty much we've got you covered, whether it's acquisition with the single and dual layer discs, over to archive on the triple and quad, over to the ODA. XDCAM is something that I hope this helped to understand the true power of it, whether it be proxy or workflows and native NLE support or user data format. It's a beautiful, beautiful format. And it's not to say that these are the only guys that you can do archive. Obviously, you can archive to these two medias as well. For helpful online sites or contexts, these are great sites to keep in mind. For those of you that really want to get some good tricks, we have a Sony.com/Videon website, which is kind of like our own little internal YouTube, although it's open externally. But you look for the XDCAM Essentials area there, and down below, here's a direct click to that. There's, I think, 5 or 6 different sessions that are really, really great that allow you to kind of expand on what I've talked about here, which I've touched on topically. But also keep in mind the SonyCreativeSoftware.com for the content browser. That's also where you would go for Sony Creative Software for the Sony Vegas. Professional are all the Pro products. 35mm are all our 35mm products, including the F5 and F55 and F65. And another thing, for those of you who are not aware of, something I'm insanely proud of because having gone through the training, having seen people go through it, we have a digital motion picture center that's actually housed at the Sony Picture Lot in Culver City. It's Studio 7 or Stage 7. Where we basically, it's an educational space that's free. You can come in and sit in on 4K training. You can actually work with the equipment. You can push it through what we call third-party alley, where you can do dailies, you can do your color correct, you can have your physical cutting of the content, and then it's push it through ColorWorks, which is on site, and then we actually have a 4K projector where you can actually see it at the end game. So, for instance, and the reason why it's there is if somebody's working on a big production and they want to actually test out the camera before they go out on site, you can bring the entire crew there and schedule time with us, and we'll do that, and it's free. So on the educational standpoint alone, it's worth time. So if, almost like the game shows, if you find yourself in Hollywood and you want tickets to the show, it'd be the same thing. If you find yourself in Los Angeles or in the area and you want to learn a little bit more about 4K or get your hands on the 4K products, our Digital Motion Picture Center is a beautiful, beautiful resource that I implore you to take advantage of, and that can be seen at sony.com/DMPC. On the Twitter side, professional support, you can follow our professional products, what's going on around that, Sony Pro USA, and then the greatest one is our CineAlta News, which is actually posted by our marketing guy who basically gets this stuff out instantaneously. As soon as it hits the wire, as he knows it, he puts it out. So if there's new news about an update, or if there's some feedback or some helpful hints, that is all available on CineAlta News.